Israel, a nation that has faced relentless enemies throughout history, a nation that has been scattered, exiled, oppressed, and almost erased. Yet time and time again, it stands firm. But why? How does a nation, seemingly so small and fragile, rise again after every attack, after every defeat, after every attempt to annihilate it? What is the secret behind Israel's enduring survival? Could it be luck, military genius? Or is there something deeper, something beyond the reach of earthly powers that continues to shield Israel? For centuries, the world has witnessed a pattern that can no longer be ignored. Pharaoh's armies drowned in the Red Sea. Babylon's great empire was brought to ruin. Hitler's forces were defeated in the most unimaginable of ways. The enemies of Israel, no matter how powerful or how confident, always fall. Why does this keep happening? Is it a coincidence? Or could there be something more profound at work? In this video, you will uncover the shocking truth behind why the enemies of Israel always fall. You will understand the divine protection that has sustained Israel through the ages. You will see how a promise made thousands of years ago continues to shape the destiny of this nation, a promise that guarantees those who bless Israel will be blessed, but those who curse it will meet their downfall. As we dive deeper into these powerful stories, you'll discover how Israel's strength is not born of its armies, its kings, or its might, but from the covenant made by God Himself, a promise that no force on earth can break. Stay tuned to learn the true reason why Israel still stands today, and how the enemies that rise against it fall, just as they always have. What is it about Israel that makes it unstoppable? What is the divine force behind its unbroken journey through history? Let's explore the truth together. Drop a comment below if you believe in the power of divine promise, and share your thoughts on how history continues to repeat itself. From the very beginning, God made a promise to Israel, a promise so powerful that it has echoed through time, defying the rise and fall of nations, empires, and kings. Genesis 12:3 tells us clearly, "I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse." These aren't just words in a book. They are words that shape the very course of history, a covenant that no human power can break. When you look at the story of Israel, you see something incredible. A nation that was scattered, exiled, and almost obliterated, yet it always rises again. It's not about Israel's military might or its political strategy. It's about the unwavering, steadfast promise of God. This promise isn't just for Israel in the past. It's still for Israel today, and it holds incredible power for anyone who understands it. When nations rise up against Israel, thinking they can defeat it, they are not just fighting a people, they are fighting the will of God. And history has shown God always wins. Think of Pharaoh, who was the most powerful ruler on earth at the time. When he looked at Israel, he saw nothing but a weak, enslaved people. Yet when he chose to defy God's command to let them go, Pharaoh didn't just face Israel's anger. He faced God's justice. The plagues that struck Egypt were not just random natural disasters. They were signs of God's power, warning of what happens when a nation chooses to stand against God's chosen people. The parting of the Red Sea wasn't just a miracle to free the Israelites. It was a divine declaration that no enemy can stand against the Creator of heaven and earth. Pharaoh's army, which was once the most feared in the world, was washed away in the sea, and Egypt was left broken and humiliated. This wasn't just an ancient event. It was a living lesson that still resonates today. When God fights for His people, no power on earth can stand against them. And this wasn't a one-time event in the distant past. It wasn't just a single chapter in Israel's history. It has happened again and again. The fall of Jericho is another perfect example. When Joshua and the Israelites approached Jericho, they saw towering walls that seemed impregnable, a city that appeared to be an insurmountable obstacle. The inhabitants of Jericho had fortified their city with immense walls, mocking Israel's faith. But God's plan was not one of military might. He commanded the Israelites to march around the city for 6 days in silence, and on the 7th day to shout and blow trumpets. This was not a plan that any military strategist would devise, but it was God's plan, and God's plans always succeed. The walls of Jericho fell without a single sword being raised. The walls that represented strength, power, and pride crumbled before the simple, unwavering faith of Israel. And so, the city fell, not because of human effort, but because God's hand was upon them. But what happens when a nation defies not just the people of Israel, but the very promise of God itself? The story of Babylon offers us another striking example. When the Babylonian Empire, under King Nebuchadnezzar, took Israel into captivity, many believed Israel's fate was sealed. The temple was destroyed, the nation was scattered, and it seemed as though the prophecy was finally fulfilled. Israel would cease to exist. But what happened next? God, in his justice, did not allow Babylon to prosper for long. Babylon's pride and arrogance in thinking they had defeated God's people was their undoing. In Daniel 5, the mighty Babylonian king Belshazzar arrogantly defiled the sacred vessels from the temple of God, using them for his own pleasure. That very night, God sent a mysterious hand to write on the wall, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. God has numbered the days of your reign and brought it to an end. That night, Babylon fell to the Medo-Persian Empire, just as God had warned. The mighty kingdom that had once seemed invincible, that had mocked the God of Israel, crumbled before his judgment. This wasn't just a political event. It was a divine declaration that no empire, no matter how powerful, can ever stand when it stands in opposition to God's covenant. And this is where the lesson becomes even more powerful. The world may rise up in defiance, leaders may declare war, nations may band together to oppose God's people. But God's promise to Israel is unbreakable, and he will always defend his people. History shows us that when people rise to bless Israel, they are blessed. When they rise to curse Israel, they fall. It is not about the power of any nation or individual. It is about God's unchanging word. Every time a nation rises against Israel, it is a direct challenge to God himself. Think about the history of the Holocaust. Adolf Hitler, who led one of the most terrifying and powerful regimes the world has ever seen, made it his mission to completely annihilate the Jewish people. 6 million lives were lost. It seemed as though the Jewish people once again were facing utter destruction. But what happened? Hitler's regime collapsed, and Israel, after centuries of exile, was reborn in 1948. Israel's restoration was not a coincidence. It was the fulfillment of God's promise. Even in the darkest times, when humanity seemed to have forgotten the divine purpose, God was faithful to his people. In modern times, Israel has faced countless challenges. The Yom Kippur War in 1973, when Israel was attacked by a coalition of Arab states, was one of the most intense battles Israel ever fought. Yet, despite being vastly outnumbered and outgunned, Israel emerged victorious. How? Not because of sheer military strength, but because God was on their side. Israel's survival, despite all odds, is a living testimony that God keeps his promises, even when the world may doubt. Now you might ask, what does this mean for us today? Is the story of Israel just an ancient tale, or does it have relevance for us now? The answer is clear. Israel's story is not just about Israel. It is a story for all of us, a testimony of how God's promises stand firm no matter what challenges or obstacles we face. If you stand with Israel, you stand with God's covenant. If you oppose Israel, you oppose the very will of God. And throughout history, we have seen that those who fight against God's people will ultimately fall. This principle transcends borders, cultures, and religions. It is a universal truth that speaks to the faithfulness of God, and it is a lesson for us all. No matter how strong the forces of evil seem, no matter how insurmountable the challenges we face appear, God's promises are unbreakable. Just as he delivered Israel from Pharaoh, just as he defeated the armies of Jericho, just as he brought down Babylon, so too will he deliver his people today. So what can we learn from Israel's story? The lesson is simple but profound. God keeps his promises, and no power on earth can change that. Whether you are facing personal challenges, struggles in your relationships, or even doubts about the future, remember this: God is faithful, and he will never leave you nor forsake you. Just as Israel's enemies fell, so too will the obstacles in your life be overcome, not by your own strength, but by the power of God's promise. This is the incredible message that Israel's story teaches us. It is not just a story of an ancient people. It is a story of divine protection, faithfulness, and unfailing promises that continue to hold true today. God keeps his word, and because of that, his people, including Israel, will always stand. So, the next time you hear someone question why Israel continues to thrive despite all odds, remember this: it is not luck. It is not coincidence. It is the faithfulness of God. And if you stand with Israel, you too are standing with the God who keeps his promises. The enemies of Israel always fall because God never loses. In the pages of history, one event stands as a profound testament to the unbreakable strength that Israel draws from its divine covenant: the fall of Jericho. As Joshua and the Israelites marched toward the city, they faced a fortress of unimaginable strength. The walls of Jericho were not just a physical barrier. They were a symbol of power and pride, a statement from the people of Jericho that they were invincible. Yet despite their imposing strength, despite the fear they inspired, the city fell, not due to Israel's military might, but because of God's command. The walls that had stood for centuries, holding back armies and defying all attempts at conquest, crumbled at the sound of a trumpet and the faith of a people who trusted in God's plan. Joshua 6:20 recounts, "When the people gave a loud shout, the wall collapsed, so everyone charged straight in, and they took the city." It wasn't about strategy. It wasn't about weapons. It was about obedience to God's instructions and the sheer power of his will. The lesson here is simple, yet powerful. When God is with you, even the strongest walls fall. Jericho's downfall wasn't just a military victory, it was a divine statement. No fortress is too strong when God commands its fall. This event teaches us that the strongholds in our own lives, whether they be obstacles, fears, or seemingly impossible situations, can be broken when we place our trust in God's promises. Jericho stands as a reminder. Our faith, though small, when combined with God's power, becomes unstoppable. God's plan may not always make sense to us, just as marching around a city for 7 days seemed illogical to Israel. But in God's economy, obedience opens the door for miracles. Jericho was the first major obstacle that Israel encountered as they entered the Promised Land, and it fell, not because of the strength of Israel, but because of the strength of God's word. As we continue to explore Israel's story, we move forward in time to another colossal enemy, the Philistines, and one of the most iconic battles of all, David versus Goliath. Goliath, a giant of a man, towered over the Israelite army, his armor glistening in the sun, his voice booming with defiance. For 40 days, he mocked Israel and the God they served, daring anyone to face him. The Israelite army, filled with fear and doubt, watched as the giant challenged their courage. It seemed impossible. How could a mere boy, a shepherd with no experience in battle, possibly defeat such a formidable opponent? But David, a young man with nothing but a sling and 5 smooth stones, knew something the rest of Israel had forgotten. When God is on your side, no enemy is too great. David's response to Goliath's threats was a powerful declaration. You come against me with sword and spear, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. 1 Samuel 17:45. David's faith in God was the true weapon he carried. His victory over Goliath wasn't due to the size of his weapon or the strength of his arm, but to the strength of his faith in God's promise. With 1 stone, David struck Goliath's forehead, and the giant fell. The battle was won, not by human might, but by God's power working through a willing heart. This moment, this victory, is one of the most powerful illustrations of how God can take what the world deems insignificant, a small boy with a sling, and use it to defeat what seems undefeatable. Goliath wasn't just a physical enemy. He was a symbol of the pride and arrogance that stands against God's people. And like all enemies who stand in defiance of God, Goliath's downfall serves as a clear lesson. No enemy is too great when you fight in the name of the Lord. As we reflect on this moment in history, we are reminded of the giants in our own lives. The obstacles that loom large in our path, the doubts that tell us we are too small or too weak to overcome them, can often seem insurmountable. But David's story teaches us that it is not the size of the problem, but the size of our faith that determines the outcome. In the face of overwhelming odds, God equips the faithful with everything they need to overcome. Victory comes not from our own strength, but from standing firm in God's promises. Just as David defeated Goliath, so too have many others throughout history faced their own giants and emerged victorious through faith. God's strength is made perfect in our weakness. 2 Corinthians 12:9. And like the Israelites marching around the walls of Jericho, we too are called to obey, to trust, and to move forward in faith, knowing that when God fights for us, victory is inevitable. These 2 stories, Jericho and Goliath, teach us something powerful. God does not need our strength to accomplish His will. He only requires our obedience and our faith. Whether we are facing walls that seem impossible to break down, or giants that mock our every move, the victory is already ours when we place our trust in God's unshakable promise. The walls will fall, the giants will fall, because God never fails. And as we look back at these moments in history, we see a clear pattern emerge. Those who oppose God's plan for His people will always fall, and those who stand with Israel, who stand with God, will be blessed. This principle isn't limited to the past. It is a living truth that continues to play out in our world today. Israel's enemies, from Pharaoh to Goliath to Hitler, all thought they could stand against God's people, and each one of them fell. But what about those who stand with Israel? What about those who bless Israel? The Bible tells us in Genesis 12:3, I will bless those who bless you. It is not just a promise for the past, it is a promise for today. Those who stand with Israel will be blessed. This truth resonates deeply in the hearts of those who have witnessed the miraculous survival and flourishing of Israel against all odds. And for those who seek to align with God's purpose, there is a powerful lesson in obedience, not just to God, but to His people. As we move forward in our understanding of Israel's journey, we see that no matter how much time passes, no matter how many challenges Israel faces, God's covenant remains unbroken. The enemies of Israel always fall, not because of the might of Israel itself, but because of the might of the God who fights for Israel. When we stand with God's people, we are standing with the Creator of the universe, who is undefeated. This is the message that we carry forward today. When God is on your side, there is no enemy too great to overcome. Whether you face personal challenges, obstacles in your faith journey, or battles that seem impossible, remember this. God's promises never fail. And just as Jericho's walls fell and Goliath's giant form hit the ground, so too will the obstacles in your life be conquered through faith, obedience, and the unwavering power of God's covenant. As we journey through the pages of Israel's history, one undeniable truth emerges. God's faithfulness to his people never wavers, even when they face the darkest of times. The story of Amalek, one of Israel's most vicious enemies, is a powerful reminder of this enduring truth. The Amalekites didn't face Israel on an open battlefield. No, they chose the most cowardly and despicable approach, attacking the weakest, the most vulnerable, those who were straggling behind the Israelite camp, the elderly, the women, and the children. Exodus 17:8 recounts the attack. The Amalekites came and attacked the Israelites at Rephidim. It was a ruthless, cruel assault and one that angered God deeply. God took this betrayal personally, as it was not just a physical attack on Israel, but a direct challenge to his covenant with his people. God's response was swift and decisive. As Joshua led the Israelites into battle, Moses stood on a hill, holding up the staff of God. As long as Moses' hands were raised, Israel prevailed. But when Moses' arms grew weary and fell, Amalek began to push forward. Seeing this, Aaron and Hur stepped forward and held up Moses' arms, and Israel was victorious. But God's judgment on the Amalekites did not end there. In Exodus 17:14, God declared, "I will utterly blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven." God made it clear, those who harm his people will face his wrath, and his promises will always stand. The Amalekites were doomed. Later, in 1 Samuel 15, when King Saul was given the command to utterly destroy the Amalekites, Saul failed to obey fully. He spared their king, Agag, and took some of the spoils of war. Because of this disobedience, Saul lost God's favor and his kingdom. The Amalekites, who had thought they could easily destroy Israel's most vulnerable, were wiped from the pages of history. God kept his word. The lesson is clear. Those who target the defenseless, those who attack God's people, will bring judgment upon themselves. It is not just a physical fight, it is a spiritual battle against the Creator, and no one wins against God. This story offers us a deep and powerful lesson that still resonates today. When we act out of malice, when we allow ourselves to become instruments of harm against others, especially those who are weak, vulnerable, or in need, we open ourselves up to divine judgment. Just as the Amalekites targeted Israel's weakest, we too must be cautious and compassionate in how we treat others, especially the vulnerable. The Amalekites faced God's judgment not simply for their attack on Israel, but for their lack of mercy and for their pride in attacking the defenseless. God calls us to show mercy, and when we don't, we risk invoking his justice. The next chapter in the story of Israel's enemies brings us to the Philistines, and specifically to their most fearsome warrior, Goliath. The Philistines, with their iron weapons and fierce military might, stood as one of the most powerful enemies Israel would ever face. And among them was Goliath, a giant towering over 9 feet tall, covered in armor, a symbol of everything that Israel seemed to lack. For 40 days, Goliath mocked Israel, challenging them to send out a warrior to fight him. 1 Samuel 17:8 says, "Choose a man and have him come down to me. If he is able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us." The entire Israelite army cowered in fear. No one dared step forward. But then came David, a young shepherd boy, unarmed and inexperienced in battle. David was not afraid of Goliath, for he knew who was with him. When he heard Goliath defy the armies of Israel, he was not filled with fear, but with righteous indignation. He boldly declared, "You come against me with sword and spear, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. 1 Samuel 17:45. David didn't see Goliath as a physical giant to be defeated with weapons. He saw Goliath as a spiritual giant that had to fall because he defied God, and fall Goliath did. And with a single stone, David struck Goliath in the forehead, and the giant fell to the ground, defeated not by David's strength, but by the power of God working through David's faith. This story of David and Goliath is one of the most iconic and powerful examples in Scripture of how God can take the weak and make them strong. David wasn't a warrior, but he was a man of faith, and that faith gave him the strength to face the impossible. In God, the weak are made strong, and the seemingly insurmountable giants in our own lives, whatever they may be, can be defeated through faith. The victory was not about the battle between David and Goliath. It was about God's power overcoming the pride of the enemy. Goliath's defeat showed the world that no matter how powerful the enemy seems, it is God who holds the ultimate power. David's victory over Goliath also teaches us a profound lesson in trust. When we face giants in our lives, whether they are physical, emotional, or spiritual challenges, it is easy to become overwhelmed. But David's story reminds us that no challenge is too great when we trust in God. We may feel small, unprepared, or insignificant, but God's strength is made perfect in our weakness. And with faith and obedience, the giants in our own lives can and will fall. Now, we shift our gaze forward to the time when Israel once again found itself under siege. The story of Israel's survival through the 20th century is a testament to God's unyielding protection and his faithfulness to his promises. After the horrors of the Holocaust, when 6 million Jews perished at the hands of the Nazis, many believed that the Jewish people were all but wiped out. Yet, in 1948, after nearly 2,000 years of exile, Israel was reborn. This wasn't just a political event. This was the fulfillment of a divine promise. Israel's return to the land was not a coincidence. It was the hand of God moving throughout history. In the years that followed, Israel fought countless wars, facing overwhelming odds, often surrounded by hostile nations. In 1948, in 1967, and again in 1973, Israel faced enemies who sought to destroy it. But time and time again, Israel emerged victorious, defying all expectations. Why? Because Israel's survival was never about military might or the number of soldiers. It was about the faithfulness of God. God had made a promise, and that promise was fulfilled. Even today, Israel remains a symbol of God's unbreakable covenant. Nations continue to rise against Israel, attempting to destroy it. But just as in ancient times, those nations eventually fall. The lesson is simple. Those who stand with Israel are blessed, and those who oppose Israel will face judgment. It is not just about politics. It is about God's sovereignty and his will for his people. Israel's story is a living testimony to the truth of God's promises, and it serves as a warning to those who would seek to destroy it. The story of Israel is not just Israel's story. It is the story of God's faithfulness, his protection, and his promise. As we look at the challenges Israel faces today, we are reminded of the same truth. No enemy can stand against the people of God. When we align ourselves with God's will, we too will experience his faithfulness, his protection, and his victory. Just as Israel has always overcome, so too will we, because God's promises never fail. And so the enemies of Israel fall, not because of Israel's power, but because God's power is greater. And this power is still at work today. Let us remember, when we stand with God's people, we stand with God himself. And no enemy, no force, no giant can ever stand against us when God is on our side. The enemies of Israel always fall because God is undefeated. As we come to the close of this journey through the sacred stories of Israel, we find ourselves standing at the intersection of history, faith, and divine promise. Throughout the ages, Israel has faced unthinkable trials, from slavery in Egypt to exile in Babylon, from the Holocaust to the modern-day battles for survival. Yet through it all, one thing remains unshaken: the covenant that God made with his people. It's a promise that has been passed down from generation to generation, a promise that continues to hold true to this very day. The stories we've explored, Pharaoh's defeat, the fall of Jericho, David's victory over Goliath, and the return of Israel after the Holocaust, are not just ancient tales of warfare and victory. They are living testimonies of God's unwavering faithfulness, his protection, and his boundless love for his people. Every wall that fell, every giant that was slain, every enemy that was defeated was not just a moment in history, it was a declaration that God's word stands forever. No matter how dark the days may seem, no matter how impossible the battles we face, God's promises are greater than anything we could ever imagine. And so, this message isn't just for the ancient Israelites. It is for all of us, because the same God who fought for Israel in the past, who led them out of slavery, who split the Red Sea, who brought down the walls of Jericho, is still fighting for his people today. When we face giants in our own lives, whether they are fears, doubts, challenges, or even the forces of this world that seem too great to overcome, we are reminded that God's power is greater than anything that comes against us. Just as he kept his promises to Israel, he will keep his promises to us. This is why Israel's story resonates so deeply with us today. It isn't just history, it is a living, breathing testament to the enduring power of faith. The story of Israel is a story of hope, a story of restoration, and most importantly, a story of God's love that never fails. When we stand with Israel, we stand with the Creator of heaven and earth, the one who holds all power, and no enemy, whether physical or spiritual, can ever stand against him. If you've found value in this video, if it has inspired you or brought light into your life in ways you didn't expect, I invite you to take a moment to send some positive energy back. This space we've created here is all about sharing the Word of God and bringing healing to hearts and minds, just as He has promised. If this video has touched you and you feel the call to help us continue spreading the message of hope, truth, and divine protection, I would be forever grateful. Every like, every share, every comment is a small act of support that makes a world of difference. It helps keep this mission alive. If you've experienced the power of God's promises through this message, don't hesitate to share your thoughts in the comments below. How has the story of Israel's survival and victory inspired you in your own life? Do you feel the power of God's presence working in your own battles? Let's engage together and continue to lift each other up, for the journey of faith is never one we walk alone. And for those of you who are able to offer a little extra support, I humbly invite you to consider lending your energy so that we can continue bringing more messages like this one to life. Your contribution, no matter how small, is a priceless gift, and it helps me to continue sharing these life-changing stories, offering encouragement, and spreading the word of God's enduring truth. I thank you from the bottom of my heart for your kindness, your generosity, and for being a part of this journey with me. Every single act of support is a testament to the unity and strength of the family of faith we are building here. As we reflect on the stories we've shared, let's remember that God's promises are the anchor for our souls. No matter how dark the world may seem, there is light in His word, and He is always with us. Israel's story is our story, a story of faith, perseverance, and the unfailing love of a God who never abandons His people. So, as we continue our journey through life's challenges, let us carry these stories with us, not just as historical events, but as living truths. The enemies of God's people always fall because God's power is undefeated, and when we stand with Him, we too will rise, just as Israel rose again after every fall. No matter the battles we face, no matter the giants that loom over us, we can stand in the confidence that God is with us, and His promises will always prevail. Thank you for being part of this community. Your presence here is a blessing, and together we can continue to walk in faith, knowing that God is our refuge and strength. May His peace, love, and protection cover you always. And until we meet again, may you find rest in His promises, knowing that no enemy can stand against the power of God's covenant.